It's 2 a.m. The rest of the world is completely silent, but your bedroom is lit up by the harsh, glowing screen of your phone. You're exhausted. Your eyes are literally burning, but you are endlessly scrolling, reading article after article about narcissism, watching videos of therapists explaining toxic behavior, mentally replaying an argument from 6 months ago, trying to find the exact moment everything went wrong. Here's what nobody tells you about that spiral. Your brain right now is running the same chemistry as a gambler who just put his life savings into a broken ATM. You may already have a folder on your phone full of screenshots and saved voicemails, an airtight case file proving the abuse was real, and somehow it still doesn't bring you peace. An MIT professor analyzed thousands of hours of survivor content and found something nobody expected. And the real reason you can't let this go may have nothing to do with your ex at all. It may be a puzzle your nervous system has been trying to solve since childhood. Stay with me, because once you understand what your brain and body are actually doing, the self-judgment starts to evaporate. First, let's establish a baseline. Nothing is wrong with you. You're not weak, you're not uniquely flawed, and you are certainly not broken. What you are experiencing, this intense, overwhelming obsession to research and analyze what happened, is a predictable, almost universal biological and psychological response to a very specific type of trauma. The clinical evidence mapping this response is overwhelming. This obsessive research phase isn't a sign that you're somehow failing at moving on. It's actually a documented, crucial first stage of taking your mind back. You're basically attempting to logically process an environment that was systematically designed to confuse you. So let's look at the mechanics of that 2 a.m. spiral. The hidden brain chemistry that is keeping your nervous system hijacked, the dark psychology behind why you keep arguing with a ghost in your head, and a surprising connection to childhood that completely changes how we view this entire phenomenon. Once you understand the physical and neurological hardware of what your brain and body are actually doing, you stop viewing this obsession as a personal failure, and you start seeing it for what it truly is, a biological survival response. You can let yourself off the hook. Let's step out of the purely emotional realm for a second and look at the physical reality of what is happening inside the brain, because the emotional feeling of this obsession is so overwhelming that it disguises itself as love, or at least as desperate romantic longing. But it's not a tragic romance, it is pure chemistry. To dismantle that illusion, we have to look at the mechanics of the trauma bond. In a toxic or abusive dynamic, the environment is never dangerous 100% of the time, because if it was, you'd just leave. If someone is continuously cruel, the human survival instinct kicks in and you're gone. The trap relies on mixing intense affection, massive influxes of praise, future faking, grand gestures, the really high highs, with unpredictable moments of severe cruelty, sudden withdrawal, or targeted criticism. The psychological term for this is intermittent reinforcement. The reward doesn't come on a schedule, it arrives at completely random intervals. The common analogy people always use is a slot machine. You pull the lever, you don't always win, so the anticipation gets addictive. But honestly, a slot machine feels a little too passive for this. This feels more like a broken ATM where you've just inserted your entire life savings. You punch in your PIN and sometimes it gives you $100, sometimes it literally electrically shocks you, and sometimes the screen just goes completely black. You don't just casually walk away from that machine. You stand there frantically punching buttons, trying to crack the code to get your safety back. You are trying to outthink a randomized system, and that random system triggers a genuine neurochemical addiction. So what's actually happening with the chemicals? Let's start with dopamine. Popular culture often mislabels dopamine as the reward chemical, the thing you feel when you get what you want. But neurologically, dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It is the molecule of pursuit, which means it's not the texts themselves that are addicting, it's the waiting for the text. You'd think dopamine should spike after the person finally treats you well, but that is the counterintuitive trap of the human brain. Studies in behavioral neuroscience demonstrate that random, unpredictable rewards cause massive, sustained spikes in dopamine that far exceed what you get from a steady, predictable reward. So when you are staring at your phone, waiting to see if they will be kind today, your brain is absolutely flooded with dopamine. You are chemically wired to pursue the elusive reward. And then when the good moments actually do happen, your brain releases oxytocin. That's a potent bonding hormone. It physically lowers your defenses and makes you feel deeply attached and safe. So you get this huge anticipation spike, followed by the bonding chemical. But then the ATM shocks you. The silent treatment hits, or that sudden devaluation begins, and your body instantly floods with cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones. The brain registers a severe threat to your emotional survival. When this cycle repeats over months or even years, it actively rewires the system. Your brain forms a highly abnormal association, linking this specific person to both life-threatening danger and the ultimate oxytocin-fueled relief from that danger. That fundamentally changes how we need to look at a breakup. When the relationship ends, you aren't just missing someone. Your brain is going through a literal physical withdrawal. The 2 a.m. urge to check their social media, the heart palpitations, the racing thoughts. That is not romance pulling you back. That is a deeply dysregulated nervous system frantically screaming for its chemical homeostasis. Recognizing that physical reality is the first key to untangling the trauma, but the chemical confusion is really just the foundation. To fully understand why the obsession persists so fiercely, we have to look at the psychological manipulation layered on top of that chemistry. Specifically, what happens when your core grip on reality is shattered? We all know the basic definition of gaslighting at this point. We've all heard the phrases, "you're crazy," "you're too sensitive," "that never happened." But let's look at what that prolonged reality distortion actually does to the brain's hardware. It's devastating because when someone systematically denies reality while simultaneously claiming to love you, it induces a severe state of cognitive dissonance. The human brain is functionally incapable of holding two opposing, contradictory truths at the exact same time without experiencing extreme psychological distress. You are trying to reconcile, this person loves me and is my safe harbor, with this person is intentionally lying to me and systematically dismantling my self-esteem. Think of trying to play a DVD that has a deep, jagged scratch right across the data track. Your brain is the laser trying to read the disc, and every time it hits that contradiction, the system freezes, panics, and skips all the way back to the beginning to try and read the corrupted data again over and over. And because the brain hates this error state, you start desperately trying to find uncorrupted data. Which brings us to a phenomenon that is so universally common, yet rarely talked about: the folder of receipts. You see this constantly in clinical practice. The survivor will maintain a literal case file on their phone or their laptop, folders full of screenshots, saved voicemails, transcribed arguments, timelines, links, legal records. They become investigative journalists of their own trauma, painstakingly building this airtight case file just to prove to themselves that the abuse actually occurred. And this creates a massive paradox. They have the proof. The screenshots are right there in their hand. The puzzle is technically solved. So why doesn't that folder bring them peace? If they possess the objective truth, why are they still trapped in that endless 2 a.m. argument with a ghost in their head? This is a point of immense frustration for both the person experiencing it and their support system. Friends and family will look at the folder and say, well, you have the proof they were toxic. Just let it go. Just move on. What those friends fail to understand is that the rumination, that obsessive mental arguing, is an effect of the trauma, not a conscious choice. A 2025 clinical training module on betrayal trauma maps this out explicitly. It identifies intense, uncontrollable rumination, chronic self-doubt, and deep confusion, not as personality quirks, but as core neurological symptoms mirroring complex PTSD. So the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, is essentially overriding the logic center, the prefrontal cortex. The folder of receipts appeals to the prefrontal cortex. It proves the event happened logically. But cognitive dissonance lives deeper. You cannot simply outthink a trauma response. More thinking, more mental arguing, and more logic do not signal to the nervous system that the threat has passed. The body is still trapped in that spinning cycle of the scratch DV. So if logic doesn't work and the folders of proof on your phone don't bring peace and your friends don't fully grasp the biological hold this has on you, where do you go? You seek external validation. You turn to the internet. We are seeing a massive explosion of highly specific communities on platforms like TikTok, often dubbed Narc Talk, as well as the sprawling forums on Reddit, Quora, and YouTube. The scale of these communities represents a massive cultural shift in how we process relational trauma. Before the algorithmic internet, this specific covert type of abuse happened almost exclusively behind closed doors. The isolation was total. Now a person can open an app and instantly find millions of people describing their exact, hyper-specific lived experience. An MIT professor actually conducted an observational study of these TikTok videos, analyzing thousands of hours of user-generated content. And the finding wasn't that these videos were just angry people venting about bad dates. Far from it. The study found that these creators were astonishingly accurate at capturing highly complex clinical behavior, specifically the mechanism of the abuser's inner emptiness and how they project their own internal rage onto their partner to regulate their own self-esteem. The accuracy of the collective crowdsourcing is striking. There's also a qualitative study from Antioch University paired with a 2024 quantitative study by researcher Dr. Singh that analysed the communication patterns in these toxic dynamics. Both studies found something deeply unsettling. The abuse tactics, the specific vocabulary used during arguments, the exact cycles of idealization and devaluation are eerily identical across completely different relationships, demographics, and cultures. It feels like they all read from the exact same dark playbook. That is why watching a therapist or a creator act out a toxic argument in a short video feels so shockingly validating. You watch a stranger on a screen say a specific phrase, and you realize that is exactly, word for word, what was said to me in my living room. It definitively proves the abuse was real, that it was objective and patterned. But there is a significant concern about this ecosystem. The algorithms running these platforms are not designed to heal you. They are designed to maximize engagement and keep you on the app. And because this content is so emotionally gripping, so deeply tied to your fight or flight response, the algorithm just feeds it to you endlessly. It creates a massive echo chamber. That's the dual-edged sword of digital validation. The concern among clinicians is the behavioral feedback loop. When you are immersed in an algorithm that exclusively serves content about covert manipulation, your hypervigilance goes into overdrive. You start seeing it everywhere. People begin over-labeling standard relationship friction. Ordinary bad moods or poor communication suddenly get aggressively diagnosed as clinical pathology. Suddenly, everyone's ex is a diagnosed psychopath, and every single disagreement is gaslighting. The external validation acts as an incredible shield, initially giving you the vocabulary to understand what you survived. But a shield can very easily become a cage if you never put it down, which forces us to ask a much harder question. If the videos and the research are giving people the exact vocabulary they need to prove they aren't crazy, why doesn't that cure them? Why does the internal loop keep playing? Why does the algorithm trap work so perfectly on some people, while others can walk away from a toxic date and literally never think about it again? Why were you susceptible to this specific complex puzzle in the first place? Answering that requires moving away from the external analysis of the abuser and looking inward, which, honestly, is often the most painful part of the process. Psychologists refer to the brain's attempt to digest a traumatic event as meaning-making. When a relationship ends in a sudden, cold, brutal discard, no apologies, no closure, just a sudden vanishing of the person you are bonded to, the mind becomes frantic to answer the question, why? Because if you can decode exactly why it happened, the brain assumes you can regain a sense of control and guarantee it will never happen to you again. But the research points to a much deeper layer beneath that search for control. A fascinating 2024 dissertation out of Texas A&M University Commerce specifically studied the psychological patterns of adults who were raised by highly narcissistic or emotionally volatile parents. When you synthesize that data with the vast amount of survivor testimonies on platforms like Quora, an undeniable pattern emerges regarding who gets trapped in that 2 a.m. spiral. The data reveals that very often, this consuming obsession with the toxic ex is not actually about the ex at all. It is an old, unhealed childhood pattern repeating itself in real time. The psychological concept is called repetition compulsion. It's the unconscious drive to place yourself in situations that replicate early trauma in a desperate attempt to finally fix it. So if your developing nervous system grew up adapting to a parent who was hot and cold, someone who demanded perfection for love, or someone who was loving one minute and intensely critical the next, your baseline for safe love was programmed incorrectly. So as an adult, when you meet a partner who mirrors that exact toxic dynamic, your nervous system doesn't register red flags. It registers familiarity. It basically feels like home, the exact opposite of what it should feel like. The toxic partner is essentially a stand-in, an avatar for the original wound. The mind isn't just agonizing over the breakup. It is the wounded child inside you, utilizing adult cognitive skills, desperately trying to solve the original terrifying puzzle of your life. What did I do wrong? How do I finally earn consistent love? It reframes everything. The intense, hyper-focused energy spent analyzing the abuser, watching the videos, diagnosing their childhood trauma. It's a defense mechanism, a very strong one. It feels infinitely safer to put them under a microscope than to turn that microscope inward and face the older, much deeper wound within ourselves. We obsess over their pathology so we don't have to feel our own grief. It is a brilliant protective mechanism of the mind, but it keeps you tethered to the trauma. So knowing all of this, the dopamine spikes, the cognitive dissonance, the algorithm traps, the childhood echoes, how do you actually escape the loop? How do you build the bridge out of the research phase and into actual recovery? The pivot happens when you recognize the distinct line between research that is helping you and rumination that is harming you. Early on, the research shatters your denial. It validates your reality. That is healthy reflection. But endless rumination, replaying the arguments, checking their digital footprint without any progression, begins to physically deteriorate your health. Clinical studies directly link prolonged rumination to severe spikes in anxiety, clinical depression, and chronic sleep architecture disruption. One survivor captured this perfectly. They said, researching is informing, healing is enlightening. The information gathering has a finish line, so let's lay out the actionable mechanical steps to actually cross that line. Step 1 is the absolute foundation, and it directly addresses the brain chemistry. Strict no contact. Think back to the broken ATM analogy. Every single time you send a text, every time you peek at their Instagram stories through a Burr account, you are walking back up to the machine and pushing a button. You're starting it all over. You're instantly restarting the chemical addiction, flooding your synapses with dopamine anticipation and cortisol stress all over again. You have to starve the chemical loop. Step 2 is about cognitive framing. You have to ride out the cravings by calling them exactly what they are. When you wake up at 2 a.m. feeling like you're going to literally die if you don't look at their profile, you have to mentally categorize that physical panic as a chemical withdrawal symptom. It is not a sign from the universe that you are soulmates. It is dopamine deprivation. It's pure biology. Step 3 is where the deepest change occurs. You have to move the healing out of your intellectual mind and down into your physical body. Standard breakup advice completely fails here. Going to the gym isn't going to fix this. You cannot logic your way out of a dysregulated nervous system by just getting a new hobby. You need trauma-focused interventions, things like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or somatic therapy. EMDR is a perfect example of addressing the hardware. When a trauma occurs, the memory gets stuck in the amygdala, constantly firing the fight-or-flight response. EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, like tracking a therapist's finger back and forth with your eyes or holding vibrating tappers in your hands. This side-to-side motion heavily taxes your brain's working memory. While your brain is distracted processing the physical movement, It forces the traumatic memory to finally detach from the cortisol response. It takes that active, burning 2 a.m. memory and finally files it away in the hippocampus as standard, non-threatening historical data. You are physically uncoupling the panic from the memory itself. Somatic therapies work similarly by teaching you to locate where the trapped physiological panic lives in your body and physically releasing it. Basically teaching your nervous system that the environment is finally safe. The final piece of the puzzle is the timeline, because when you are in the thick of the withdrawal, all you want to know is, when will I feel normal again? The clinical consensus suggests that the acute crisis phase, that blinding can't eat, can't sleep obsession, typically lasts about 1 to 3 months of strict, unbroken no contact. But the deeper recalibration of your nervous system, feeling fully grounded and like yourself again, generally takes 1 to 2 years. And it is vital to expect that the healing will not be linear. You will have 3 weeks of genuine peace, and then a random Tuesday will hit. A smell will trigger a memory, and you will suddenly feel like you are back at square one. But that is not a failure. That is just the brain doing the final sweep of the corrupted data. So let's bring all of these moving parts together. If you are currently caught in that 2 a.m. spiral, holding your phone in the dark, understand that this obsession is a fiercely intelligent biological fight for your own reality. Your brain is utilizing everything at its disposal to survive. The cognitive dissonance, the research, the reading, the analyzing. It is a structurally necessary bridge out of the abuse. But a bridge is designed to be crossed, not to build a house on. The ultimate goal of this recovery isn't to magically erase the memories or pretend the abuse never happened. The goal is to reach the day when what happened to you simply becomes a factual chapter in your history, rather than the defining core of your entire identity. This intense, painful obsession phase is just stage 1. So what does this mean for you right now today? If you've been expending massive amounts of energy, losing sleep, and dedicating all of your immense investigative power to figuring out why they operate the way they do, what would happen if you took all of that intense focus and turned it completely inward? What early wound inside of you made that chaotic, toxic dynamic feel recognizable as love? And perhaps most importantly, what deep unmet need were they temporarily filling that you can now begin to learn to fill for yourself? Answering those questions is where the true reconstruction of the self finally begins. Be remarkably kind to yourself this week. Take a deep grounding breath and close the tabs on your phone.